you ever flown a plane?
Thank you for the question, Senator. No, I have never flown a plane.
So you weren't a military pilot or a commercial airline pilot?
No, Senator.
Have you ever worked for an airline?
No, Senator.
Have you ever worked as an air traffic controller?
No, Senator.
You ever worked for a company that manufactures airplanes?
No, Senator.
You ever worked for a company that fixes airplanes?
No, Senator.
The FAA recently required airplanes to be equipped with an ADS-B transponder. So, Mr. Washington, can you quickly tell me what airspace requires an ADS-B transponder? Quickly, please.
Thank you for the question, Senator. Not sure I can answer that question right now.
That's okay. We'll just keep going. So that's a pretty important part.
Mhm.
But another question. You've said that your national security background, and again, I appreciate your military experience there, but you say that's prepared you for this role. Okay. The FAA has classified airspace to meet the needs of airports, air traffic, and also national security. The FAA has also designated special use airspace over DoD bases critical to national security. So what are the 6 types of special use airspace that protect this national security that appear on FAA charts? Quickly, please.
Sorry, Senator, I cannot answer that question.
Okay, we'll just keep going. So thank you.
Sure.
Since World War II, the FAA has required pilots to have a valid medical certificate. I've got one. In recent years, the FAA has relaxed these standards through the introduction of the Sport Pilot Certificate and also Basic Med. It's been a great success. More than 70,000 pilots in the last 6 years have used Basic Med to maintain their flying privileges. So what are the limit? It comes with some limitations. So what are the operational limitations of a pilot flying under Basic Med?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I'm not a pilot, so.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Washington, thanks for being here today. I have some concerns with your nomination, but first of all, besides that, I just want to say thank you for your service to our country through our military. We have a lot of veterans, a lot of military installations in our state of North Carolina, and so we appreciate what you've done. Now, you've been nominated to lead an agency with authority to regulate aircraft, airspace, and airmen. The U.S. has some of the most complex airspace in the world. I mean, we've got over 200,000 registered aircraft, more than 1 million pilots in our country, and over 45,000 flights per day handled by ATC. Now, with recent issues under the Biden administration, from the flight disruptions over Christmas, the NOTAM or the Notice to Air Missions ground stop, and the recent near miss incidents in New York, Texas, and just yesterday in Boston, my colleagues and I were concerned about the many or several parts of your background and your lack of aviation experience. Now, there's many new regulations that the FAA has issued or is in process of developing. Here's one, for instance. The FAA is spending billions of dollars on its next-gen program, as you're aware, to modernize the national airspace system. A key part of this update is moving towards GPS navigation for pilots and ATC. Now, as part of this transition, obviously you'd oversee the Federal Aviation Administration. So any idea what those restrictions are under Basic Med, quickly?
Well, some of the restrictions I think would be high blood pressure. Some of them would be
it's more like how many passengers per airplane, how many pounds in different categories, and what altitude you can fly under. So, and then amount of knots. It's under 250 knots. So, it's not having anything to do with blood pressure. So, let's keep going here. It's aviation. I've heard you talk about aviation and safety, and it being a particular concern of yours. I appreciate that. Stall spin accidents are a particular concern for general aviation safety advocates. Accidents involving an unintentional stall account for nearly 25% of fatal aviation accidents. And these happen at spins at low speed and low altitude, and they're particularly dangerous. Can you tell me what causes an aircraft to spin or to stall?
Again, Senator, I'm not a pilot, but I would lean on our career employees and our safety folks within the FAA.
Okay, let's keep going. So we've mentioned just recently, Senator before me mentioned the 737 MAX issues. So there are many questions surrounding the FAA's aircraft certification process. 2 years ago, Congress passed a major reform package to address these concerns. It's now up to FAA to implement these laws by issuing regulations and monitoring compliance. Mr. Washington, what are the 3 aircraft certifications the FAA requires as part of the manufacturing process? Quickly, please. 3 aircraft certifications.
Again, what I would say to that is that one of my first priorities would be to fully implement that Certification Act and report.
You know the
back to
3
this
types,
committee.
Mr. Washington? The 3
No.
types? Okay. Yeah, that's type certificate, production certificate, and airworthiness certificate. Okay. All right. Let's just keep going, see if we can get lucky here. All right. So just since January, the U.S. has narrowly averted 3 aviation disasters. On 3 separate occasions, airplanes came dangerously close to colliding on runways at New York JFK, Austin Bergstrom, and the Boston Logan Airport. The Austin incident reminded me of the Tenerife accident, which is the deadliest aviation accident in history. Both the incident at Tenerife and Austin involved 2 planes on a runway in dense fog. The FAA's ATC procedures manual has separation standards. Now, I know you run a big airport, so you should probably know this one here. It's got separation standards for planes using the same runway. So can you tell me what the minimum separation distance is for landing and departing airliners during the daytime, Mr. Washington?
I don't want to guess on that, Senator,
Okay.
but
All
it would be easy for me to find out.
Thank you. You know, the FAA is woefully behind on integrating unmanned aircraft standards, but are you familiar with the difference between Part 107 and Part 44809 when it comes to unmanned aerial standards? Unmanned like drones. Are you familiar with the difference?
Yes.
Okay. You know the difference between those 2, Part 44809 and Part 107? Do you know the difference there?
No, I cannot
That's okay.
spell that out for you.
Senator's time is.
Yeah, thank you.
expired,
You
so-
know, the FAA can't afford to be led by someone who needs on-the-job training. And for that reason, I'm going to be opposing your nomination.
Size boxes, and then here, there are different boxes here. I'm just curious what this is supposed to mean.
Yeah. Well, that is, opportunity, if you will, opportunity and how you position people that may be less fortunate for the same opportunities that other people might receive. Is equity with everyone on a level playing field, if you will. And that is what we espoused at every organization that I've been in, especially LA Metro.
And what do these boxes represent, I guess? I mean, they're, equality here. They have different. Okay. I got to say, Mr. Washington, I appreciate the attempt at an explanation there, but I don't fully understand why equality and equity are different. I would assume that equality of opportunity is something that we all believe in and agree with. Mm-hmm. I worry just in some of your public comments and some of the things that you've said, you tend to take this focus of explicitly saying that color blindness, of looking at people without regards to skin color, is somehow in and of itself discriminatory. And I was hoping to elucidate that a little bit by appeal to this chart and try to understand it a little bit better. But I have to be honest, and I'm not trying to be rude, Mr. Washington, I just don't fully understand what this is meant to convey and how it might influence some of your policies. In an effort to kind of drill down to that, I just want to ask just a few questions here, because the aviation industry is maybe the single industry where aptitude and where safety matter more than almost anything else. I mean, I can't imagine even going under the knife. I'd probably choose having a safe pilot as more important than even going under the knife for a surgery. So I just want to ask sort of how this criticism of color blindness that you've had in some remarks in your career intersect with how you think about the standards for pilots that exist in the aviation industry. So a few just very direct questions. Do you believe that white, Black, and Latino airline pilots should be able to read, speak, and understand English before becoming commercial airline pilots?
Yes, I do.
Great. Thank you. Do you believe white, Black, and Latino airline pilots should have to hold the commercial pilot certificate and an instrument rating as they currently have to do?
Yes, I do.
Great. Do you believe that white, black, and Latino airline pilots should have to have at least 1,500 hours of total flight time in order to receive an airline transport license?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Washington. I appreciate that. And
So for 20 months, you've been in charge of the Denver airport. You're in charge of the airport's buildings, correct?
I am in charge of everything that goes on at that airport.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure that's exactly right. You're in charge of parking at the airport. Is that correct? How many
Yes, sir.
parking spaces are there at the Denver airport?
Thousands.
Okay. You're in charge of all the shops and restaurants in the airport. How many restaurants are there in the Denver airport?
We have anywhere from 150 to 200 or so.
You're in charge of coffee shops and clothing stores and newsstands. You're not in charge of the pilots, are you?
No, Senator.
You're not in charge of the airplane mechanics, are you?
No, Senator.
You're not in charge of the air traffic controllers, are you?
No, Senator.
You know, I look at prior FAA administrators. You and I talked a couple of days ago. I respect your military service. I look at prior FAA administrators. Current acting FAA administrator Billy Nolan was a commercial airline pilot. He worked at multiple airlines in management roles. He has certificates in aviation safety from 3 different institutions, from the U.S. Army Safety Center and the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. That's under President Biden. Administrator Steve Dixon, under both Biden and Trump, was an Air Force fighter pilot, a commercial airline pilot, an executive at Delta Airlines, 40 years of aviation experience. Acting Administrator Daniel Elwell was an Air Force combat pilot, a commercial airline pilot, a senior FAA official, and an aviation industry executive. Administrator Randy Babbitt was a commercial airline pilot for 25 years and served as the president of a labor union for pilots. Those are all people who know something about aviation and safety. As I look at your record, I see a record where you've got experience with buses, you've got experience with trains. Buses and trains are very different from planes. My understanding is this administration previously considered you for the board of Amtrak. That could well have been a position you were qualified for, and you might well have received bipartisan support to serve in that role. You know, a lot of discussion, quite rightly, has focused on the horrific crashes of the 737 MAX that took 346 souls from us. Let me ask you, Mr. Washington, what is an angle of attack sensor?
The angle of attack sensor is a sensor that is on the front of the plane that controls the tilt and the altitude of the plane.
And how many of them are there on a 737 MAX?
I believe 2.
And what systems are there if there are contradictory signals from the angle of attack sensor?
What systems are there?
Yeah.
I would say the MCAS system, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. The MCAS system is responsible for the crashes at issue. What happens when you get a different reading from 2 different sensors?
Can you repeat that question, Senator?
What happens when you get a different reading from 2 different angle of attack sensors?
Well, I think human reaction needs to take over if that occurs.
So why did that not happen on the Lion Air and Ethiopian Air flights?
Well, Senator, I'm not a pilot. I don't know if I can answer that particular question.
Mr. Washington, I believe you.
Huh?
But at the end of the day, that's the fundamental problem. For this administration to nominate someone as FAA administrator who can't answer the question, why were 346 people killed in horrific crashes that resulted in the 737 MAX being grounded for a long time, is striking. By the way, Administrator Dixon, after the FAA recertified the 737 MAX, he went and flew it personally.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, let me be clear, and you and I talked about this. FAA administrator is a specialized position. I'm not qualified to be FAA administrator. I have no idea how to fly a plane. No one in their right mind would put me in charge of aviation safety because I don't have that experience. I suspect most of the members of this committee are in a similar position. the American people, when they think about aviation safety, when they think about, I played in this committee, a Southwest Airlines and FedEx plane almost colliding at Austin's airport. They want an FAA administrator who knows why those planes crash and knows how to fix it to keep them safe. And with all respect, Mr. Washington, it gives no comfort to the flying public that their pilot might be a transgendered witch, but doesn't actually know how to prevent the plane from crashing into the ground and killing them. I believe your record is woefully lacking. And in fact, you have zero aviation safety experience. And I don't believe you'll have the votes for confirmation, as you and I visited about earlier this week. The FAA faces enormous challenges. It must modernize our airspace while safely integrating new entrants like drones. It is trying to keep its reputation as the gold standard for aviation safety while dealing with far too many close calls and operating an outdated air traffic control system that must safely move roughly 2 million passengers a day. To meet its mission, the FAA needs a Senate-confirmed leader with decades of experience in aviation to make certain that the flying public is safe, the agency's primary obligation. This obligation is so important that Congress mandated that the FAA administrator must, quote, have experience in a field directly related to aviation. The nominee before us, Phil Washington, had a long and honorable career in the military, but he does not have any experience in aviation safety. This quite simply is a position he is not qualified for. I'm disappointed that the administration has chosen to treat a critical safety position, a position keeping our families safe. They've chosen to treat it as a patronage job. As a result of the White House playing politics with the flying public safety, the FAA has lacked a Senate-confirmed leader for a year now. I expect we'll hear some members of this committee gloss over Mr. Washington's lack of aviation and aviation safety experience by saying he has a record of strong management of transit agencies. He understands buses, and isn't that good enough for planes? But his record demonstrates the opposite. The Democrat city transit agencies he's run have been beset by mismanagement and wasteful spending. In 2019, CBS News reported Mr. Washington tried to add a $200,000 sauna to the LA Metro's employee gym after being presented with a more taxpayer-friendly $50,000 version. He proposed this lavish spending as city buses, quote, broke down and caught fire due to lack of money. The New York Times reported that a Denver rail project overseen by Mr. Washington ran up a $2 billion plus deficit and had become over 30 years behind schedule. Just last month, Mr. Washington and other Denver officials spent more than $100,000 on a junket to Africa to drum up support to Denver's airport. Government waste and delayed over-budget projects are things we want to change at the FAA, not continue. I'm also afraid that Mr. Washington's record suggests that he'd focus on virtue signaling at a time when the FAA needs to be laser-focused on aviation safety and modernization. As LA Metro CEO, he said, quote, everything we do in terms of mobility, we look through the lens of equity. At the Denver airport, he's spending millions of dollars to build a special, quote, hall of equity and change the contract bidding process to place a heavier emphasis on so-called equity and so-called social cultural merits. Safety, not political posturing, needs to be paramount at the FAA. I also have serious concerns regarding outstanding allegations of misconduct going back to Mr. Washington's time at LA Metro. He was named in multiple search warrants in an ongoing criminal public corruption investigation and was the subject of multiple whistleblower complaints. One whistleblower who exposed details of a politically connected contracting scheme claims to have been retaliated against by Mr. Washington. After Mr. Washington went to Denver, LA Metro settled the claims for more than $500,000. And just last month, Mr. Washington was named in a discrimination and retaliation lawsuit filed by a former Denver airport employee. Mr. Washington failed to notify this committee of the lawsuit, one of dozens of omissions in his questionnaire, suggesting that he has been less than fully transparent and raising concerns about how he'll collaborate with us as we work to reauthorize the FAA. Finally, Mr. Washington, as a retired member of the military, needs a waiver from both the House and the Senate to be eligible to serve, since federal law explicitly requires that the FAA administrator be a civilian, and retired members of the military do not, under the statute, qualify as civilians. On 5 occasions, Congress has passed legislative waivers so that retired military personnel could serve at the FAA. We would do the same for Mr. Washington if his record merited it, if he had experience in aviation safety. But it doesn't. And if Senate Democrats force this nomination through without a waiver, a legal cloud will hang over every single FAA action. Let me close with a quote. Quote, "I have said that it is very important that in this day and age, when it comes to aviation, safety must always be our top priority. We've considered the nomination, the nominee's record, an ongoing case of whistleblower retaliation, and given all of that, it is clear to me that he is not the right person for the safety culture that we need today at the FAA." Those were the words spoken about a former FAA nominee by the chairwoman of this committee in 2019 about Steve Dixon, who had 40 years of aviation experience. Mr. Washington is not the right nominee for this position.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. In my opening statement, I forgot to mention a letter by our former House colleague, Chairman